Welcome to Lesson 14.6, Trust-Based Philanthropy. This lesson explores one of the most significant movements reshaping philanthropic practice. Trust-based philanthropy represents a fundamental reconsideration of how funders and grantees relate to one another, challenging assumptions that have structured traditional grant-making for decades. The movement questions whether burdensome applications, restrictive grants, and extensive reporting actually produce better outcomes, or whether they instead create barriers, waste resources, and perpetuate harmful power dynamics. As this is an evolving movement with practices varying considerably among funders, our discussion presents concepts and trends rather than settled doctrine. You will encounter funders at various points along this spectrum, from those deeply committed to trust-based principles to those maintaining traditional practices while expressing interest in change, to those skeptical of the approach entirely. Understanding this landscape helps you navigate diverse funder relationships and recognize opportunities when funders signal openness to different ways of working. We will examine the philosophical foundations of trust-based philanthropy, explore specific practices being adopted, consider implications for grant professionals, and acknowledge tensions and critiques. Whether or not individual funders embrace these approaches, understanding the movement helps you engage thoughtfully with changing philanthropic expectations. Understanding trust-based philanthropy requires examining the context from which it emerged. Modern institutional philanthropy developed with emphasis on efficiency and accountability. Early 20th century foundations drew on business management principles, seeking to apply scientific approaches to social problems. Grants were tools for purchasing specific outcomes, and grantees were effectively contractors delivering services specified by funders. The late 20th century saw increasing emphasis on metrics-driven grant-making. Logic models, outcomes measurement frameworks, and performance reporting became standard requirements. Funders sought assurance that their dollars produced measurable results. These practices were presented as ensuring accountability and maximizing impact. However, growing administrative burden on nonprofits raised concerns. Studies documented that organizations spent significant portions of their budgets complying with funder requirements rather than delivering programs. Different funders required different reports on different timelines using different formats, multiplying effort without adding insight. Research began questioning traditional assumptions. Studies found minimal correlation between reporting complexity and actual program quality. Investigations revealed that grantees often shaped reports to funder expectations rather than genuine learning. Power dynamics meant grantees rarely provided honest feedback about what was or was not working. Calls for change emerged from practitioners and grantees who experienced these systems daily. Rather than isolated complaints, organized advocacy for alternative approaches developed. Trust-based philanthropy emerged as one articulation of these concerns and aspirations. The Trust-Based Philanthropy Project articulates 6 core principles that define the movement. While different organizations express these principles with varying language, the core concepts remain consistent. Give multi-year, unrestricted funding represents perhaps the most significant shift. Rather than single-year project grants with detailed restrictions, trust-based funders provide general operating support over multiple years. This allows organizations to allocate resources strategically, plan sustainably, and respond to emerging needs without seeking permission. Do the homework means funders research organizations before requesting extensive application materials, rather than asking grantees to compile information that funders could find themselves. Trust-based funders investigate publicly available information, review existing materials, and request only what they genuinely cannot obtain otherwise. Simplify and streamline paperwork reduces administrative burden. Applications become shorter or use common application formats. Reports become conversations rather than formal documents. Requirements focus on what funders actually use rather than what they might theoretically want. Be transparent and responsive addresses power imbalances. Trust-based funders share information about their own strategies, acknowledge their limitations, respond promptly to communications, and provide honest feedback about funding decisions. Solicit and act on feedback creates accountability flowing both directions. Rather than grantees reporting to funders, funders also seek grantee input on their own practices and demonstrate willingness to change based on what they learn. Offer support beyond the check recognizes that organizations need more than money. Capacity building, connections, learning opportunities, and advocacy support complement financial grants. Trust-based philanthropy explicitly engages with power analysis that traditional philanthropy often avoids discussing. Funders hold structural power over grantees. They control resources that organizations need. They set terms for access to those resources. They evaluate performance against criteria they establish. This power exists regardless of individual intentions. Good people with generous spirits still occupy positions of power that shape relationships. How power affects information flow becomes clearer through this analysis. Grantees rarely tell funders what is actually going wrong because honesty might threaten future funding. Reports emphasize success because failure might end relationships. Innovation stalls because doing something different risks funder disapproval. The power dynamic corrupts communication that would otherwise enable learning. Historical concentration of philanthropic resources reflects broader social inequities. Wealth that enables foundation giving accumulated through systems that often disadvantage the communities foundations now seek to serve. Foundation boards and staff demographics rarely match communities receiving grants. Decisions about community needs get made by people outside those communities. Community voice in resource allocation challenges traditional expertise-based models. Trust-based approaches ask whether funders actually know better than communities what communities need. They explore participatory grant-making where community members help make funding decisions. They question whether professional evaluation frameworks capture what communities actually value. Shifting from power over to power with describes the aspirational change. Rather than funders controlling grantees, partnerships develop where both parties contribute expertise and both share accountability for outcomes. Among trust-based practices, the shift toward unrestricted funding represents perhaps the most significant operational change. Understanding the rationale and implications helps you engage appropriately with funders at various points on this spectrum. General operating support, sometimes called GOS, provides funding for whatever an organization needs without restrictions on use. Project grants fund specific activities with budgets that restrict how money can be spent. Traditional philanthropy emphasized project grants as ensuring accountability. Trust-based approaches question whether restrictions actually improve outcomes. Organizational sustainability benefits from unrestricted support. Restricted grants often do not cover true costs, leading to perpetual financial stress. Organizations cobble together multiple restricted grants that collectively do not fund operations. General operating support allows organizations to build reserves, invest in infrastructure, and plan beyond grant periods. Strategic flexibility enables grantees to respond to changing circumstances. Restricted grants require continuing activities even when context shifts. Unrestricted funds allow pivoting when approaches prove ineffective or when new opportunities emerge. Organizations can act on lessons learned rather than completing predetermined activities, regardless of learning. Reduced administrative burden tracking restrictions saves resources. When each grant has different rules about what can be charged, accounting becomes complex and time-consuming. Unrestricted support simplifies financial management, freeing resources for mission work. Funder concerns about accountability persist despite these arguments. Some funders worry that without restrictions, money might be misused. Trust-based responses note that organizations have multiple accountability mechanisms beyond funder restrictions, including boards, auditors, regulators, and community stakeholders. Restrictions do not prevent misconduct, they just add compliance burden for honest organizations. Multi-year funding commitments complement unrestricted support by providing the time horizon organizations need for genuine planning. Traditional annual grants create constant uncertainty that undermines effectiveness. Planning horizons expand with multi-year commitments. Organizations can develop 3-year strategies knowing resources will be available. Program development can unfold gradually rather than rushing to show results within 12 months. Staff can be hired with confidence about funding continuity. Organizational thinking shifts from survival mode to impact mode. Staff retention and development benefits follow from funding stability. Talented people leave organizations where their positions depend on annual grant renewals. Training investments make sense when staff will remain to apply learning. Organizational culture improves when people are not constantly anxious about job security. Reduced annual fundraising pressure frees leadership attention. Executive directors often spend half their time or more seeking funding. When major funders provide multi-year commitments, leaders can focus on programs, partnerships, and strategic development. The organization becomes less reactive and more intentional. Long-term relationship development between funders and grantees becomes possible. Rather than transactional interactions around annual applications and reports, genuine partnerships develop. Funders learn enough about organizations to provide meaningful support. Trust develops through sustained engagement. Exit planning and sustainability conversations become possible within multi-year frameworks. Rather than abrupt endings when funders shift priorities, transition planning can occur. Organizations have time to diversify funding sources. The relationship accommodates honest discussion about long-term sustainability without threatening immediate funding. Trust-based philanthropy significantly reimagines reporting practices. Rather than extensive written reports that consume organizational time, alternative approaches seek genuine learning with minimal burden. Phone conversations replacing written reports reflects recognition that dialogue produces better information than formal documents. A 45-minute call with candid discussion reveals more than a polished written report that obscures challenges. Funders who want honest information about what is working and what is not learn more through conversation than through compliance documents. Existing materials instead of custom documents reduces duplication. Organizations already produce annual reports, financial statements, program summaries, and board updates. Trust-based funders accept these existing materials rather than requiring separately formatted grant reports. If information exists somewhere, funders find it rather than asking grantees to repackage it. Annual reports as reporting documentation works when funders accept publicly available materials. Many organizations produce comprehensive annual reports for broad audiences. These can satisfy funder reporting requirements, serving multiple purposes with single effort. Funders who require custom reports essentially ask grantees to write the same information in multiple formats. Learning-focused questions shift emphasis from compliance to improvement. Rather than asking grantees to prove they did what they promised, trust-based funders ask what you learned, what surprised you, and what you would do differently. These questions produce actionable insight rather than defensive justification. Aggregate reporting reduces individual burden. Some funders commission portfolio-wide evaluations rather than requiring each grantee to evaluate independently. This provides funders with rigorous assessment while minimizing individual organization reporting obligations. Trust-based philanthropy challenges funders to practice the transparency they request from grantees. Historically, foundations often operated opaquely while demanding extensive disclosure from applicants. Clear communication about priorities and timelines helps organizations make informed decisions. Rather than vague guidelines leaving applicants guessing, trust-based funders specify what they seek and when decisions will occur. Organizations can assess fit before investing application effort. Honest feedback on declined proposals respects organizational investment. Traditional practice often provides form rejections with no explanation. Trust-based funders explain why proposals were not funded, enabling organizations to improve future applications or recognize poor fit without repeated attempts. Sharing foundation strategy and decision processes demystifies grant making. Rather than treating internal deliberations as confidential, some funders publish strategic plans, explain evaluation criteria, and describe how decisions get made. This transparency enables better applications and reduces perception that grant making is arbitrary. Acknowledging funder limitations and mistakes models the learning orientation funders request from grantees. Foundations make errors, pursue strategies that do not work, and have blind spots like any organization. Admitting this publicly creates space for honest relationships and demonstrates that failure is learning opportunity rather than cause for punishment. Salary and staffing transparency addresses accountability concerns. Foundation staff often earn significantly more than nonprofit staff they fund. Making this information public invites discussion about resource allocation within philanthropy itself. Some argue that foundation administrative costs deserve the same scrutiny applied to nonprofit overhead. Participatory grant-making extends trust-based principles by involving community members directly in funding decisions. This practice most directly addresses power imbalances by sharing decision authority with those traditionally excluded from philanthropic governance. Community members in funding decisions challenges assumptions about expertise. Traditional grant-making assumes foundation staff and board members possess the knowledge needed to identify good investments. Participatory approaches suggest that people living in communities understand community needs better than outside observers, regardless of professional credentials. Shifting expertise recognition from professionals to those affected represents significant change. Community residents may lack degrees in program evaluation, but possess lived experience with problems grants address. Youth may not have nonprofit management experience but understand youth programming from participant perspective. Expertise gets redefined to include knowledge gained through experience. Various participation models offer different depths of engagement. Some funders add community representatives to advisory committees that inform but do not control decisions. Others establish community panels with actual grant approval authority. Still others provide funds directly to community groups who redistribute to local organizations. The appropriate model depends on context and commitment. Implementation challenges require attention. Compensating community participants fairly, providing necessary context and training, managing power dynamics within participatory processes, and avoiding tokenism all require intentional effort. Poorly implemented participation can replicate rather than challenge power imbalances. Building community capacity through participation creates benefits beyond individual grant decisions. Participants develop understanding of philanthropy, build relationships across organizations, and strengthen collective analysis of community needs. The process itself generates value independent of funding outcomes. Trust-based philanthropy reshapes what grant professionals need to do and know. Even as traditional practices continue with many funders, understanding trust-based approaches prepares you for evolving expectations. Changing application and reporting skills become necessary. With simplified applications, compelling brief narratives matter more than exhaustive detail. With conversation-based reporting, verbal communication skills gain importance. With existing document acceptance, ensuring organizational materials serve multiple purposes becomes strategic. The skills portfolio shifts without abandoning traditional capabilities. Relationship building emphasis increases as transactional interactions decrease. When funders want ongoing partnership rather than annual applications, cultivating genuine relationships becomes central. Understanding funder interests, providing useful information proactively, and maintaining connection between formal interactions all matter more. Honest communication becomes more valuable in trust-based contexts. When funders genuinely want to know what is working and what is not, organizations that share challenges candidly build stronger relationships than those maintaining positive facades. Grant professionals become trusted advisors when they facilitate honest assessment rather than defensive reporting. Strategic thinking over compliance shifts the professional emphasis. Rather than ensuring all requirements are met, strategic analysis of organizational direction, funder alignment, and partnership potential becomes primary. Compliance matters less when funders reduce requirements. Strategic positioning within philanthropic relationships matters more. Advocating for trust-based practices becomes possible as you understand the movement. You can help funders still using traditional approaches. Consider alternatives. You can help organizations seek funders aligned with trust-based principles. You become an informed participant in field evolution rather than passive recipient of funder decisions. While trust-based philanthropy gains attention, most grant professionals work in mixed environments where some funders embrace these approaches while others maintain traditional practices. Navigating this landscape requires discernment. Not all funders embrace trust-based approaches, and some actively resist them. Government funders have legal accountability requirements that limit flexibility. Some private funders believe traditional oversight produces better outcomes. Others express interest in trust-based principles while maintaining restrictive practices. Assuming all funders want trust-based relationships leads to misaligned engagement. Reading signals about funder orientation helps you calibrate appropriately. Application length and complexity signal expectations. Reporting requirements indicate what funders actually want. Language in guidelines and communications reveals orientation. Past grantee experiences provide insight. Program officer conversations directly clarify expectations. Adapting engagement style to funder preferences demonstrates professionalism. With trust-based funders, lead with strategic discussion and relationship building. With traditional funders, lead with responsive compliance and detailed documentation. Neither approach is inherently better. Each fits different funder expectations. Avoiding premature assumptions about openness prevents missteps. Some funders use trust-based language without implementing practices. Others maintain traditional appearances while being quite flexible in practice. Test assumptions carefully rather than acting on surface signals alone. Building relationships matters regardless of funder type. Even traditional funders benefit from genuine relationships beyond transactional grant management. Trust-based principles about honest communication, mutual respect, and partnership orientation improve all funder relationships, even when full trust-based practices are not adopted. Trust-based philanthropy is not without critics. Understanding critiques helps you engage thoughtfully with the movement's limitations and ongoing debates. Accountability concerns come from various perspectives. Some argue that fiduciary responsibility to donors requires verification of fund use. Others note that government oversight expectations may conflict with simplified reporting. Still others suggest that reduced accountability could enable misconduct. Trust-based responses address these concerns but do not eliminate legitimate debate. Applicability across organization types and sizes raises questions. Trust-based approaches may work well with established organizations with proven track records. Whether they work equally well with newer organizations, those without strong governance, or those in fields requiring specialized expertise remains debated. One size may not fit all contexts. Risk tolerance varies among funders based on their governance, donor expectations, and organizational culture. Some can absorb occasional failures as cost of trusting more broadly. Others face constraints that limit acceptable risk. Trust-based approaches require willingness to accept some poor outcomes as price for reduced burden on all. Evaluation and learning tensions persist. Trust-based philanthropy de-emphasizes reporting, but funders still need to learn whether strategies work. How to maintain learning orientation without imposing burden remains challenging. Some argue that rigorous evaluation serves grantees and communities even when burdensome. Pace of change considerations affect implementation. Organizations built around traditional practices cannot transform overnight. Staff trained in compliance-focused grant-making need new skills. Boards accustomed to detailed reports need reorientation. Change happens gradually even among willing funders. Consider a scenario to apply what we have discussed. A foundation that has funded your organization for several years announces it is transitioning toward trust-based practices. They offer to convert your current project grant to a multi-year unrestricted grant. The new application is 2 pages instead of 20. Rather than quarterly reports, they propose annual phone conversations. They ask you to share what you are learning rather than proving what you accomplished. This sounds attractive, but consider the implications. Your organization's systems are built around compliance. Staff are trained to document everything for funders. Finance systems track restricted funds meticulously. Board reports emphasize grant compliance. How will systems adapt when restrictions disappear? What internal accountability replaces funder requirements? Your leadership may have concerns. Some executive directors worry about unrestricted funds being seen as slush funds. Boards may want continued documentation even without funder requirements. Staff may be uncertain about reporting expectations. Communicating the change internally requires attention. Honest conversation challenges organizational culture. If you have always presented positive narratives to this funder, shifting to candid discussion feels risky despite funder encouragement. Trust develops gradually. How quickly can you move toward genuine transparency? The funder's transition is also imperfect. They may still have staff accustomed to traditional approaches. Systems may not fully support new practices. The journey involves mutual adjustment, not instant transformation. How would you navigate this transition opportunity while managing organizational change? Trust-based philanthropy continues evolving, and the landscape you encounter will likely differ from what exists today. Understanding trends helps you anticipate and adapt to changes. Movement continues evolving as more funders experiment with practices. What began as alternative approach gains mainstream attention. Major foundations explore trust-based elements even if not fully adopting the framework. The center of gravity in philanthropic practice shifts gradually toward these principles. Research informing practice generates evidence about what works. Studies comparing outcomes from trust-based versus traditional grant-making provide data beyond philosophical arguments. As evidence accumulates, practices become more refined. Specific contexts where trust-based approaches work best become clearer. Technology enables new approaches to transparency and relationship management. Platforms facilitating common applications, shared reporting, and funder transparency continue developing. Technology can reduce administrative burden while maintaining appropriate information flow. Digital tools supporting participatory grant-making continue emerging. Generational change in philanthropy affects norms. Newer philanthropists often arrive with different expectations about relationships and power. Next-generation foundation leaders bring perspectives informed by critiques of traditional philanthropy. Demographic shifts among foundation staff and boards influence organizational culture. Your role in shaping field evolution matters. Grant professionals are not passive recipients of funder decisions. You can advocate for better practices, share information about what works, model trust-based principles in your own work, and help organizations engage constructively with funders at various points on the spectrum. The field develops through collective action by people like you. Today's lesson explored trust-based philanthropy, a movement reshaping how funders and grantees relate. We examined the historical context from which the movement emerged, recognizing how efficiency and accountability emphases produced administrative burden and communication distortions that undermined the outcomes they sought to ensure. Core principles including multi-year unrestricted funding, simplified processes, transparency, feedback responsiveness, and support beyond the check address persistent problems in traditional philanthropy. Power analysis reveals structural dynamics that good intentions alone cannot overcome, requiring intentional practice changes. Specific practices operationalize these principles. Unrestricted funding provides strategic flexibility. Multi-year commitments enable genuine planning. Simplified reporting reduces burden while maintaining learning. Funder transparency models the openness funders request from grantees. Participatory grant-making shares power with communities. For grant professionals, these changes require new skills while not abandoning existing capabilities. Relationship emphasis increases, honest communication gains value, and strategic thinking matters more than compliance focus. Mixed environments where not all funders embrace trust-based approaches require discernment about funder orientation and adaptive engagement. Critiques raise legitimate concerns about accountability, applicability, and risk that deserve serious consideration rather than dismissal. The movement continues evolving, and you participate in shaping its development. In our next lesson, we explore capacity-building grants, which often align with trust-based principles by investing in organizational strength rather than just program delivery. Thank you for engaging with these concepts about philanthropic relationship transformation.